The rain had been falling for hours, tapping against the old supermarket windows like 1,000 tiny reminders of how heavy life had become for her. Inside, under the fluorescent lights that flickered in dull tones, she stood at the checkout counter with trembling hands, staring at the groceries that felt more like a burden than a blessing. A loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a few bruised apples, and a pack of rice sat on the belt, items so simple, yet to her, they carried the weight of survival. Her fingers nervously clutched the worn leather strap of her bag, knowing very well that the money inside wasn't enough. The line of customers behind her shifted impatiently, sighs filling the air, but her heart was too loud, pounding with shame, fear, and helplessness. At that moment, as the cashier's voice announced the total, her world seemed to collapse under the weight of a number she couldn't afford. Backhand index pointing right. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that touch the heart, please take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel Kindness Spark for more real, inspiring stories. She had never imagined her life would come to this. Once upon a time, she had been the woman with a stable job, a warm home, and dreams bright enough to light up her evenings. But when her husband passed away suddenly in an accident, the foundation of her life shattered. Bills piled up, grief consumed her, and raising her little daughter alone became a daily battle against despair. Her savings vanished quickly, and the security she once took for granted turned into constant uncertainty. She applied for jobs endlessly, walked into offices with hope that always turned into rejection, and day after day she returned home with empty hands but forced smiles for her child. Now, standing at the checkout counter, she could feel the walls closing in. The cashier repeated the amount, her voice mechanical yet sharp, cutting into the silence that grew around her. Her hands trembled as she reached into her bag, counting coins and small crumpled bills, praying they would be enough. But as her heart sank with the realization that she was short, she felt the heat of humiliation rise to her cheeks. The world blurred with tears she tried to hold back. The people behind her shuffled with irritation, but she couldn't move, couldn't think. For her, the weight of poverty wasn't just about money, it was about dignity slipping away, about being seen as less, about the constant fear of not being able to provide for the one little soul who depended entirely on her. And then, it happened. Without a word, from behind her, a hand reached forward and slid a card across the counter. The cashier, surprised, looked up, but the person behind her only gave a quiet nod, signaling to continue. She froze, turning slightly, her blurred vision catching sight of an older man. Tall, with weathered hands and tired eyes, dressed in a simple jacket that looked as worn as her spirit. He didn't speak. He didn't wait for thanks. He simply stood there, steady, while the machine processed the payment. The sound of the transaction complete was like thunder breaking through a storm of despair. She couldn't find words, her throat too tight with emotion, her tears spilling freely now. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the man simply gave her a gentle smile, one that held no pity, only understanding, before stepping back, as if to vanish into the ordinary world again. She clutched the bag of groceries to her chest as though it was the most precious gift she had ever received. The stranger's act was simple, but to her, it was a lifeline, a reminder that humanity still existed in a world that often felt cruel. She left the store with tears in her eyes and her heart heavy with gratitude she didn't know how to express. That night, as her daughter sat across the small wooden table eating bread and milk with joy in her eyes, she whispered a silent prayer for the stranger who had saved her from breaking in public. The child's laughter echoed in the small, dimly lit apartment, and for the first time in weeks, the mother allowed herself to breathe. The food on the table wasn't just nourishment, it was hope served on a plate, delivered by a silent act of kindness. Days turned into weeks, but that moment never left her. Whenever she walked past the supermarket, she would slow down, wondering if she might see the man again. She never did, yet his face stayed etched in her memory, not because of who he was, but because of what he had done. His silence had spoken louder than any words, teaching her that kindness didn't need a reason, and compassion didn't need recognition. But life remained difficult. Though that single act of generosity had lifted her spirit, the struggles were still real. She still juggled unpaid bills, still worried every night about whether she could keep the lights on, still searched desperately for work. Yet something inside her had changed. She no longer felt entirely alone. That stranger's kindness became a small flame that she carried with her, guiding her through the darkest nights. One afternoon, as she walked back from another failed job interview, she noticed an elderly woman sitting at a bus stop, clutching a bag of groceries that had torn at the bottom, cans rolling onto the sidewalk. People passed by without stopping, their eyes fixed on their phones, their pace unbroken. For a brief second, she hesitated. Her own problems were enough, her burdens already too heavy. But then she remembered that day in the supermarket. She remembered how it felt to be saved silently, without judgment. She rushed forward, gathered the scattered cans, and helped the old woman secure her bag. The woman's eyes, filled with relief, reminded her of her own that day. In that moment, she realized something profound. Kindness doesn't just end with the person who receives it, it grows, it flows, it multiplies. The stranger who had once lifted her had unknowingly sparked a chain reaction, and now it was her turn to pass it forward. From then on, whenever she had even the smallest chance, she chose kindness. She would drop coins into the hands of the homeless man on the corner, share extra food with a neighbor in need, or smile at strangers in the street, knowing how much a single gesture could mean. Her circumstances didn't change overnight, she still faced hardships, but she carried herself differently. The weight of her struggles no longer crushed her spirit, because she carried within her the unshakable truth that even in the darkest times, there are strangers who care, who reach out, who choose kindness without asking for anything in return. Months later, she finally found work at a small bakery. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to keep her afloat and bring stability to her daughter's life. On her first day, as she stood behind the counter, she noticed a tired-looking man hesitating with a loaf of bread, counting coins in his hand just as she once had. Her heart clenched at the familiar sight. Without thinking twice, she quietly covered the difference from her own pocket, sliding the bread across the counter with a smile. She said nothing, because she now understood the power of silence, the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. Her daughter grew up surrounded not only by hardship but also by the lessons her mother carried, that kindness can save a soul, that strangers can become angels without wings, and that the smallest act can ripple into something far greater. And though she never saw the man who paid for her groceries again, his memory lived on, not in the pages of her past, but in the actions she carried forward every day of her life. The story of the stranger who paid for her groceries without saying a word wasn't just about money, or survival. It was about something deeper, the reminder that even in a world filled with noise and indifference, humanity still whispers through the quiet acts of compassion. That one silent gesture not only filled her kitchen with food but also her heart with faith. And sometimes, faith is the very thing that keeps us going. Backhand index pointing right. If this story touched your heart, please support Kindness Spark by liking this video, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing for more stories that remind us of the goodness in humanity. Your engagement helps spread kindness further than we can imagine. Speech balloon. Before you go, share in the comments, have you ever experienced a stranger's kindness, or have you ever been that stranger to someone else? Your story might inspire someone who desperately needs hope today. And so, she carried on, not just with groceries in her hands, but with kindness in her soul, determined to keep the flame alive that a silent stranger had once lit within her.